Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee. If you were to ask me, which is Elvis Presley's best studio album, after a relatively brief deliberation, I would probably steer you in the direction of his 1969 classic, From Elvis in Memphis. Now, if you go back to early 1969, Elvis Presley must have felt as if he was sitting on top of the world, having just gotten out of a suffocating and, at the end of the day, a potentially career-ending film contract. Not to mention the success of his comeback special in December of 1968, a special that was not only seen as an artistic achievement, but also sort of re-established his relevance. And as a lifelong Elvis fan, when I say re-establish his relevance, I'm not saying that as if I see it, that's the way I see it through my eyes. Because in my opinion, Elvis was never irrelevant, and he continues to be as relevant today as he ever was. So when I talk about Elvis reestablishing his relevance, I'm referring to sort of him reintroducing himself into the general public's consciousness. Sort of reintroducing himself to mom and pop suburb, if you will. So in January of 1969, wanting to build off of the momentum of his 1968 comeback special, as well as sort of put a little bit of distance between him and some of the sort of questionable film soundtracks that he had been recording throughout the bulk of the decade. Now, I'm one of those people, I'm a diehard, lifelong Elvis fan. I am one of those people, I sort of will defend a lot of the sort of film soundtracks that Elvis was recording throughout the 1960s, within reason. I mean, within reason. Let's not get nuts here. I mean, some of those film scores were inexcusable, if you ask me, even among the most diehard of us Elvis fans. But in 1969, Elvis wanting to sort of, build off of his momentum from the 68 comeback special and create a line of demarcation between where he has been and where he is going, Elvis entered American studios in Memphis, Tennessee, to record what would be, I think, his best and most unique studio album of his entire career. The album would eventually be called From Elvis in Memphis. And for this record, Elvis sort of decided to change up his lineup a little bit as far as the musicians that worked with him. And at the suggestion of his friend George Klein, he decided to use a band that were known as the Memphis Boys, a band that happened to be the backing band, or the studio band, I guess you should say, for the American Sound Studio in Memphis. Now, this was a band that had a very unique sound and a very unique style. And this was something that very much appealed to Elvis Presley, who wanted to kind of modernize his sound and take what he had been doing in sort of a different direction. And as it turns out, at least in my opinion, not only does Elvis in January and February of 1969 record what is his best studio album, at least in my opinion, it is certainly his most unique. Now, this record does not sound like anything that he had done before it, and this record does not sound like anything that he would do in the future. Now, following this record in 1969, Elvis sort of fell into a kind of a sound into the 1970s, at least when it came to his studio albums. Now, I'm not somebody who's sitting here talking, I'm not trying to sit here and poo-poo Elvis's 70s studio records, because I happen to be a huge fan of Elvis's studio records throughout the 1970s. But at a certain point in time, Elvis sort of fell into a comfort zone, and those records throughout the 1970s, as good as they are, and I would argue that a lot of them are very, very good, most of them have kind of a sound. They have a style that sort of became predictable, I would argue, up until Elvis's final record, Moody Blue, in 1977, which to me is still, to this day, despite the fact that Elvis was in such bad health, and you can make the argument really not even interested in his own career at that point in time, I think that Moody Blue is one of the best records he ever made, maybe second only to this record, at least in terms of its uniqueness and its relationship to the rest of his catalog. So in 1969, Elvis goes into American Sound, I should say, and he records this record. That becomes, in my opinion, his best record. But because it is so unique to what he had been doing before that and where he was going after this record sort of becomes Elvis's sort of transitional record. Now, if you were thinking of this record in terms of sort of, in sort of the terms of a band like the Beatles, I mean, this is Elvis Presley's, Rubber Soul and Revolver era, both, sort of combined into one album. Now, I would take this album over Rubber Soul and Revolver every day. I am not necessarily the world's biggest Beatles fan. But having said that, that is my favorite era of the Beatles. Some of their early stuff, the I Want to Hold Your Hand, some of the real sort of simple poppy stuff is good. I don't dislike it, but some of it's a little bit too, simplistic even for me. And then where the band was going eventually sort of after Rubber Soul and Revolver, some of that sort of Magical Mystery Tour and Sgt. Pepper's and the White Album and all that, it gets a little bit too much out there for me. So I sort of really like that sort of those two transitional records by the Beatles. And I would make the argument every day that if you're looking for Elvis Presley's best studio album of the lot, to me, this is it. Now, if you're somebody who is maybe not necessarily, the most familiar with Elvis, or you're kind of looking to sort of jump into the shallow end of the pool, first off, how is that even possible? Where have you been living for the last, almost century? Maybe this isn't the record that you would necessarily want to start off at. You might want to start off with something that's a little bit more familiar, a little bit more of like the hits, the rockabilly hits from maybe the 1950s, or maybe even some of the bigger songs from the 1960s. Now, this album, although I do believe it is his best by quite a large margin, I must say. On top of that, this one isn't necessarily chocked full of the hits, the standards that you always hear when you hear Elvis songs. Not saying that these are necessarily like deep cuts, but to me, this record has a lot more of kind of an artistic feel to it. It was a little bit more daring. I think Elvis was feeling very excited about his career in January and February of 1969. And as we all know, as Elvis fans, when Elvis got excited about something, there was nothing that he couldn't do, and I'm convinced that he went into the studio knowing that he was going to create what was probably going to be one of the best records of his life, because he was just in that mindset. He was basically starting over. He had been given a clean slate after that, horrendous, terrible, movie contract, a contract that, like I said before earlier, it could have potentially ruined his career. And when Elvis came back to music and making records, I mean, he came in with both guns blazing, at least in my opinion. Now, this is a record, Elvis is somebody that critics can get a little bit lukewarm on. They can be a little bit elitist when it comes to Elvis. They can become a little bit snobby when they talk about the king of rock and roll. But even critics, from what I've read, generally speaking, find this to be one of Elvis's best albums, if not his best album. To me, this is easily his best album. If I'm only allowed to take one record with me from Elvis, sort of a desert island type scenario, as far as the studio records go, I mean, I think this is the one I'm taking with me. If it were, man, it's tough. If you're going to only take one Elvis, let's say you get arrested and you're being sent to prison, and the judge says you can take 5 records with you. That's it. That's all you get to listen to for your whole life. And one of them is an Elvis record. Oh, man. I might be taking Madison Square Garden, the Live at Madison Square Garden. That might be my one album I take, because I never get tired of that record. I talked about that record previously on this channel. There's just a wicked energy to that record that is just indescribable. But as far as studio records go, I'm probably taking this one. Not only is it the best, I definitely think it's probably my favorite. I think it is the most interesting. I think it has a lot of the best songs. I think Elvis challenges himself on this record. Like I said, I think he was very excited about what he was doing. He was very inspired by the 68 comeback special and having sort of a new lease on his career. The one thing about this record I've always sort of found to be, a little bit lackluster is the artwork. I do remember there were actually a couple times before I bought this record a long time ago on CD, there were actually a couple times that the artwork sort of, I passed on it because of the artwork. Of course, the front sleeve is a still that was taken from the 1968 comeback special in December. It's not a terrible album cover, but just with what an incredible sort of artistic record this is, especially for somebody like Elvis, who maybe wasn't necessarily the most artistic guy in the world. I think they could have done better on the front sleeve, and for sure, they could have done better on the back sleeve. I don't understand what this is all about. This, to me, just looks like a very kind of cheesy stock photo from his film career. I mean, honestly, you can't do better than that. With this album, you can't do better than this as the back sleeve. I mean, to me, that kind of looks like somebody's like decent driver's license picture. Not like mine, which is arguably one of the worst driver's license pictures in the history of the DMV. My driver's license picture looks like I was beaten with a post as I was making my way through the parking lot. I have actually had, on more than one occasion, I've actually had people laugh at my ID picture. And one person laughed at it and said, well, take it as a compliment. I mean, you look so much better in person. I mean, is that even you? And I always have to explain to people, my wife woke me up at 7 o'clock on a Monday morning, or it was my Saturday morning, but a Monday morning, said, we got to go to the DMV right now. Your license is about to expire. Now, for my wife, who tends to sort of catastrophize things, my license expiring immediately means it probably wasn't expiring for like 4 weeks, but she gets in this mindset where it's just, it has to be done now or it's never going to get done. And that's basically what I look like. I look like I got dragged out of bed. I still had the shit in my eyes. I still, it was like the worst picture of all time. So it's not as bad. It's definitely, this picture of Elvis on the back is at least better than that. But I've always disliked the album art on this record, especially since I love this record so much. This record was released on June 2nd, 1969. It was produced by Chips Moman and, of course, Elvis Presley's longtime producer, Felton Jarvis. Like I said, this is a record that, to me, this is easily Elvis Presley's best and most ambitious, and in some ways, I think his most challenging and most artistic studio record of his career. Side 1 starts off with a song called Wearing That Loved-On Look, a song that was written by Dallas Frazier and Arthur Owens. I really love this song. Basically, the story of this song is that, Elvis has to leave town for a sort of, unmentioned period of time, and while he's away, his lady is carrying on as if she's a middle schooler whose parents are on holiday in Acapulco. I mean, Elvis comes home. Let's just say he's been on a business trip for the past week. He comes home, maybe unannounced. Maybe he caught the early flight in from New York. And he arrives home, and the house is just a wreck. You can tell that she's been partying. She looks as if strange men have been using her as a jungle gym. She's got the hickeys. She's sort of disheveled. You can tell she's probably been up drinking all night. She's like, oh, it's so good to see you. Why are you here? And Elvis looks around and basically is like, what in the hell has been going on around here? And she's like, nothing. Been, hanging out with the cats, reading the newspaper. And Elvis can see through that pretty flimsy lie, very easily, and basically sends her packing. I really love this song. I love the sort of instrumentation on this song. Elvis's performance throughout this entire record, vocally, is incredible. This is another way that I would describe this record as a sort of transitional record. Not only based on the record's sound and its production, but on Elvis's vocals just in general. I mean, it's definitely a huge step above what he was doing for the film soundtracks in the 1960s, but yet it's not quite as big and operatic and majestic as his voice would become later on in the 1970s. Now, I love Elvis's records in the 1970s. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love them. I love Elvis live in the 70s. I love the whole 70s shebang. But I love his voice on this record. It's not quite as big and epic as it would become a little bit later on. The next song after that is a song called Only the Strong Survive. This is another great song on this record. I would make the argument, honestly, this record does not have any bad songs on the whole thing. This song was written by Jerry Butler and Ken Gamble. This song is basically about a person's first breakup, and you're just sitting there basically in a puddle of your own misery. And, your mother comes up to you, she puts her arm around you, and she whispers words of encouragement into your ear, basically saying, hey, you know what? You're a catch. You're a handsome guy. You have a lot to offer. There's a lot of fish in the sea. She was kind of like a wreck anyway, and she wasn't very nice to you. And although that doesn't really help, because going through your first breakup is something that's, very intense. It's something that, it just is something that you have to get through. I know when I went through my first breakup, it was something that I honestly didn't know if I was going to be able to get through it for a while. I ended up moving states just to get away from this. This person I was in my first relationship with, and she wasn't even like Satan or anything. It was just, your first love. It just destroys you. And everything you see in your daily life reminds you of that person. And later in the song, the narrator of the song is sort of sitting outside, and he's kind of on the curb. And he's just, he's trying to, take to heart what his mother said, but the pain is just so overwhelming that he can't kind of get past it. And eventually, you picture his dad coming up, who's a much more sort of gruff individual. He's a little bit more emotionally unavailable. Mom is there to sort of be the pillow, and dad is sort of there to be the rock. And your dad comes up and, he says, look, son, I sympathize with what you're going through, but, the neighbors are starting to talk. We don't really do that in this family, son. So if you're going to be out here, you may as well mow the lawn while you're at it, I love this song. It is very sad. I would say that's sort of a recurring theme throughout most of this record. I think that most of the songs on this record are sort of sad, sort of heartbreak, end of relationship songs. Sometimes even, more sort of, stronger sort of subject matter than that. I love the song Only the Strong Survive. If you've ever been, anybody who's ever gone through a first breakup, it's something that you can definitely relate to. The next song after that is a song called I'll Hold You in My Heart. Sort of a self-explanatory song in terms of the lyrics. I would say it's not unsimilar to the previous song, Only the Strong Survive. This song was written by Eddie Arnold and Hal Horton. Instrumentally, this song reminds me of kind of a modernized take on Elvis's 50s sort of rockabilly style. There's a few songs on here that are kind of a throwback to Elvis's kind of rockabilly sound. And if you're unfamiliar with this studio, American Sound in Memphis, Tennessee, and their house band, the Memphis Boys were known for having a very distinct sound that was sort of sultry, soulful country. And I was going to mention that earlier. If I didn't, allow me to now. A lot of this record has that kind of sound, but there are a few songs that have this sort of kind of a 1969, take on rockabilly. Almost a little bit Sha Na Na-ish. I don't know if Elvis fans would appreciate him being compared to Sha Na Na. I mean, Sha Na Na would love being compared to Elvis. I know that for a fact. The next song after that is a song called Long Black Limousine. This song was written by Vern Stovall and Bobby George. This is actually one of my favorite songs on the entire record. This might actually be my favorite song on the entire record. This is a song about a girl who I assume it's a woman, but this is a person who leaves her sort of little podunk town out in the country, and she's going to chase her dreams. And as she's leaving her hometown, she basically tells all the people who live there, I'll see you guys later. All right, I'm getting out of here. I'm chasing my dreams. I have no use for you. I have no use for this town. You are all a bunch of dullards. And the next time you see me, I will be in the back seat of a long black limousine. I'm going out there, and I'm going to make something of myself. And sure enough, she moves to the big city. She becomes somewhat successful. She starts sort of, she starts sort of traveling around in these sort of different social circles. And unfortunately, she sort of meets with an untimely demise. And she is brought back to her hometown for her sort of memorial service, where she rolls up, and she is in the back seat of she's in the back of this long stretch limousine, but unfortunately for her, she is in a box in the back of this, what they sort of describe as a limousine hearse. And all of the people in her hometown are there, and I get the sense they sort of don't know what to make of this. She wasn't necessarily maybe the nicest person in the world, and she didn't really treat these people with as much respect as she treated her, her big city friends with. And all of a sudden, all of these sort of, big city sort of rich, successful people start to sort of converge on her little rural hamlet where she grew up. And it creates this sort of, there's this sort of her post-life, the life that she grew up in and her adult life. And what's interesting is you get the sense that maybe she wasn't necessarily, proud of her small town and the people that she grew up around when it came to her city folks. And when she would go home to visit, maybe she didn't always tell people about her friends off in the big city. So these two groups of people are sort of forced to interact with each other based on their mutual friendship of this girl. And what's interesting to me about this is, when we pass away, basically, and I've known a few people over the years that have passed away, and unfortunately, it's unfortunate, but one thing that's interesting about it is you're sort of allowed no, secrets when you pass away. Everything eventually sort of comes out. People start talking, people start telling stories, and either things add up and they don't add up. And it's what's in, things that you might protect from each other in your life. Like you might protect, you might play golf with a guy who loves Trump, but, but you also might be in a garden club with a bunch of hippies. And, you wouldn't necessarily bring your golf friend over to, the garden club, and you wouldn't necessarily take your garden club guys over to the golf course. But once you pass away, all of these sort of interactions, all these people are kind of forced to at least interact to celebrate your life. I realize this is a long, sort of bogged down description of this song, but I find this song to be very interesting. It's one of my favorite songs on the record, and actually, this song has a real kind of Dickie Lee sort of vibe to it. Dickie Lee is somebody who was from Memphis, a songwriter, and of course, he was a singer also, but he was more known and more celebrated as a songwriter. And this song kind of reeks of Dickie Lee because it's got like a, real kind of morbid sadness to it. It sort of revolves around this dead girl, and Dickie Lee was somebody who was really famous for writing songs about dead girls, songs like Patches, and things like that. And the song has like a real sort of Dickie Lee lyrically kind of vibe to it. I love this song. Like I said, I think this is kind of about, worlds colliding in on somebody who, passes away, and maybe they would have, preferred to sort of keep these two parts of their lives at arm's distance. The next song after that is a song called It Keeps on Hurtin'. Keeps Right on Hurtin'. This is another song that has that kind of modern, rockabilly sort of vibe to it. It's kind of a modern take on Elvis's 50 sound. Lyrically, it is basically very straightforward. This song was written by Johnny Tilson. It's a good song. It's not necessarily my favorite song on the record, but I think it's a song that is pretty decent. The last song on side one is an old Hank Snow song called I'm Moving On. I love this song. Basically, this song is about somebody who, you're moving on. You're kind of tired of dealing with their nonsense. You're ready to sort of kick them to the curb. I love this song instrumentally. To me, this song has kind of like a trucker country Jerry Reed kind of vibe to it. I kind of actually wish Elvis would have done more songs in the sort of Jerry Reed sort of vibe. This has a real like trucker country kind of feel to it. I love the part where he says, "Move on, son." I love his voice on this song. This is another one of my favorite songs on the record. Side 2 starts off with a song called "Power of My Love," written by Bernie Baum and Bill Giant. This song has like a real blues, country, rock kind of vibe to it. Kind of reminds me of a lot of the sound that was coming out of kind of the 1968 comeback special, especially on the sort of, the bigger stage when he was doing the more, the production pieces with all the dancers and everything. This song fits right in there. This song has like a real sultry, kind of sleazy feel to it. Elvis's vocal performance on this song is a real like panty dampener. Basically, he's like, do your worst. What are you going to do? I'm here for the long haul. This might be a situation where, the other person in the relationship is sort of distrustful. Maybe they've been down a bad road or two with a relationship, and it's up to you to sort of prove that you were there, that you were the rock, that you were going to not abandon them, you aren't going to leave them. And I feel like that's what this song is about. Is like, do your best, do your worst. I'm here. Like, I'm not going anywhere. Test me any way you want to, but you're going to find that I'm going to pass the test because that's how much I love you. The next song after that is a song called "Gentle on My Mind." This is a song written by John Hartford. This is about a man that has become a drifter. Sort of telling the story. It's kind of a reminiscent song about kind of a lost love, but you get the sense that this guy's life has really kind of, hit the skids. You get the sense that he's sort of a drifter, maybe a roustabout, maybe homeless, maybe sort of struggling with alcoholism and perhaps drug addiction. But it all kind of started with a broken heart. That's kind of the sense that I get, at least. In this song, it has a really dark sort of feel to it. I think that this record, there's a lot of darkness on this record. That's one of the things that I like so much about it. The next song after that is a song called "After Loving You," written by Johnny Lance and Eddie Miller. This is a song about comparing basically any girl that you would ever meet now to your past lover, and basically how they are not going to basically live up to what she was, sort of putting her on a pedestal that nobody else could ever sort of live up to that standard. I like this song. It sort of is a sequel to perhaps a song that would be about your first breakup, maybe a song about Only the Strong Survive, because after you go through your first breakup, you kind of can't help but sort of compare everybody to that first relationship, your first love, as regardless of how healthy or unhealthy or happy or unhappy it was. It's just sort of human nature. I like this song a lot. The next song after that is a song called "Love Travels on a Gravel Road." This song is written by Dallas Frazier and Arthur Owens. Basically, it's a song about the ups and downs of relationships. No relationship is perfect. If you think you see one that is, it is basically just an illusion. And if you think that you're in a relationship that is perfect, you're basically kidding yourself. Basically, it talks about how the test of any real love is adversity. Something that I would agree with that. My wife and I have been through a fair amount of adversity, especially over the past 2 years, and we're still standing arm in arm, or at least I think we are. I have to ask her, I guess. The next song after that is, one of my favorite songs on the record. It's either this one or "Long Black Limousine," or, those are my two favorite songs on this one. This one was written by Burt Bacharach, and it sort of predicts the imminent demise of a relationship, but this song has a real kind of cool, groovy, definitely has a Burt Bacharach kind of feel to it instrumentally. I love this song. It is just, at the risk of sounding superficial and a little bit unintelligent, this song just sounds cool. It's just got a cool vibe. I love Elvis's voice on this song. This and Long Black Limousine are probably my two favorites. The album closes out with, I would argue, probably the most well-known song on this record. That is In the Ghetto. This is a very well-known song written by Mac Davis. Of course, this song is about a boy who's born into an inner-city family suffering from pretty extreme poverty. And as the kid grows up and he kind of, realizes what he's going without, and his family continues to struggle financially, this kid turns to drugs or turns to crime in order to make ends meet, and he becomes involved. You sort of get it doesn't say it, overtly in the lyrics, but you sort of get the idea that he turns to gangs and perhaps dealing drugs, certainly living a very violent life, and unfortunately, at the end of the song, he is gunned down in the street, and this is a song that is as relevant today lyrically as it was when it was written. This is a song, if not more relevant today, with the amount of gun violence that we have, at least in this country. And I'm not making a statement about guns politically, one way or the other. You can have your guns. I don't really care one way or the other. I'm just saying that when it comes to urban crime especially, it seems as if we are going through a little bit of an epidemic with it right now. I've heard in the past, probably even while Elvis was still alive, but certainly since Elvis has passed away, I've heard him criticized for recording this song. I've heard people say that this song was insensitive, that this was a song that he should have never touched. Politically, I totally disagree with that. I think Elvis knew poverty as well as anybody based on the way he grew up, and especially when he was in high school living in the projects in Memphis. I'm sure he saw some pretty righteous, tough dudes as a kid. And it's well documented that Elvis's family, when he was a child, was extremely poor. So I think he does know this song. I think that's why he does such a great job on this song. I think vocally, this is one of his most powerful performances, basically throughout his entire career. I believe that Elvis, when he decided to do this song, some of his upbringing and his childhood, I think some of it came into play when he recorded this record, because you go back and you listen to it, his voice on this record is incredible. It's powerful. You can tell, you can hear, you can feel that he is invested in the song, at least in my humble opinion. Anyway, that is a little bit about what is, in my opinion, Elvis Presley's best studio album from 1969 from Elvis in Memphis. Like I said before, if you are sort of unfamiliar with Elvis and you're kind of wanting to jump a little bit more into the shallow end of the pool, you might want to shop in a different store before settling in on this record. But once you discover this record and you get really into it, and you kind of dig through some of the songs, I think that this record is going to become a favorite of anybody that is even remotely a fan of Elvis Presley, especially somebody that is as big a fan as I am. So go back and check it out. Listen to it, love it, live it. Anyway, man, thank you so much for checking out this video. This is Archaic Records. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Be sure to go out and support your local record store. Check back most weeks for Morrissey Monday, a weekly celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths, as well as other record content and album reviews throughout the week. And until then, my friends, talk to you then.